Hi, I'm Chip Rogers, President and CEO of the American Hotel and Lodging Association. We really appreciate you joining us this afternoon. We've got a number of key speakers to talk about the impact that COVID-19 has had not only on our industry, but what is going to happen if there is no further assistance from the federal government. And so that's going to really be the topic, most of the topic of our discussion today. We welcome your questions. We'll provide the best answers that we possibly know how. And if you could use the question box on the Zoom to send me the questions, I will ask them. So if you see me leaning down on my computer to click the next question, that's why I'm doing that. But if you'll send me those through the Zoom, we'll get them addressed to the appropriate person. We have representatives today from three very diverse states, but three incredibly important states, not only in our industry, but in our nation's economy, with California, Florida, and Illinois. And we'll hear from some very important people from each one of those states. But before we go to our first presenter from California, I did want to mention that this problem started obviously back many months ago, near the beginning of the year. And we as an industry saw it coming over from China and from Europe, and we began to brace for it. Congress, to their credit, did a fantastic job early on with the passage of the CARES Act. But when you look at the CARES Act, you recognize clearly, and they even outlined it in the legislation, that it was meant to be 8 to 10 weeks with respect to PPP. Main Street lending has not worked at all, but the PPP was very valuable to our industry and many small businesses around the country. But the problem that was perceived to be only 8 to 10 weeks back in March continues to persist to this day. And as we head into what are typically the lean times of the year for our industry, we recognize a very, very serious problem, and that is, notwithstanding the PPP that was a temporary lifeline, the assistance from lending institutions, particularly traditional lending institutions, has begun to change, and we fully expect that. And so the forbearance and the delay in payments and the flexibility that was offered back in March and April is not being offered the same way today. And so our industry looks at declining revenues and dramatically increasing expenses at a very, very difficult time. And you're going to hear some of those stories today. And so our message to Congress is very simple. Back in March, you considered this such a significant threat to our nation's economy that you passed the single largest spending package in the history of the world. With respect to the PPP, while it was a great program, you anticipated this would last 8 to 10 weeks. We're now almost 6 months into this, and there has not been another round of PPP. And there are businesses, particularly in and around tourism, whether they be hotels, restaurants, airlines, that are desperately needing some help just to get to the other side. And I want to be clear about that. We believe that our industry can make it, and most of our members can make it, if we can make it just to next spring and summer, when we think things will begin to pick up in a significant way. But if we can't make it there, then you're going to have a lot of unnecessary pain that will result in taking what could be a 6 to 8 month problem and turning it into a 3 to 4 year problem. And we'll talk more about those details coming up. But first, I want to turn it over to one of the nation's really leading experts in our industry. He is the president and CEO of the California Hotel and Lodging Association, Lynn Moorefield. Lynn?
Great, thank you, Chip. As you said, it's no secret that the California's hotel industry has been decimated by the impacts of COVID-19. Since travel and tourism is one of the pillars of our state economy, unfortunately, we can expect this impact to be felt for several years at a minimum. This is particularly true for our employees. It's almost unfathomable to think that we haven't experienced the worst yet. With our traditionally slow season coming up, as Chip mentioned, it's going to get worse before it gets better. In California, hotels were essentially closed due to COVID-19 for the entire second quarter, and now recently travel severely hampered by the wildfires. In San Francisco, they just opened their hotels for individual travel just 2 weeks ago. The numbers tell the story. 108,000 job loss statewide as of September. That's 108,000 individuals that have lost their jobs. Almost 6,000 hotels closed or foreclosed on. And these numbers are only going to increase without congressional aid that Chip outlined. California's job losses are going to almost double to 200,000 people. 200,000 people. Okay, we would expect significant permanent closures, jobs lost forever. If that happens, our recovery, which is expected to occur not until 2023, will take years to realize. We're looking at a decade out. We're ready to welcome the world back to California safely. Through H&LA's Safe Stay program, hotels are established leaders with their current safety and cleaning protocols. Unfortunately, until the world is ready to return to California, we need DC's help. Without financial support, our employees, our hotels, and communities will continue to fall into the deep economic crater the pandemic has created. Thank you. Now I'd like to introduce Bijal Patel, Chair of CH&LA and CEO and Principal Partner of the Coast Redwood Hospitality. Bijal?
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So as Lynn mentioned, my name is Bijal Patel, and I'm actually a third-generation hotelier based in Northern California. Coincidentally, my family this week celebrates 44 years in the hospitality industry. And last night at the dinner table, my father, my grandfather, and I were discussing the current state of our industry and how it compares to things we've experienced in the past. And we were all in agreement that though we have operated through oil crises, natural disasters, war, terrorism, and even recessions, nothing can quite compare to the hardships and fear that we have been experiencing over the last 6 months with no end in sight. Though our industry was allowed to open middle of June here in California, many of the things that would bring guests to stay at our hotels remain closed to this day. Attractions like Disneyland, Santa Monica Pier, Santa Cruz Beach Boardwalk, Monterey Bay Aquarium, they all remain closed. Corporate and leisure meeting businesses like weddings, celebrations, those remain not allowed. And many counties across our state have placed restrictions on beach access, which was another blow to the tourism industry in California. Furthermore, the wildfires that have been devastating our state over the last month and a half give us another reason to be worried moving into the winter months. Owner and operators in California, like myself, rely on summer season, May to September, to be able to operate year-round. With year-to-date occupancy ending August 2020, we still are only averaging 41.2% occupancy compared to last year's 74.6% occupancy. And we are uncertain on how we can survive the winter. Our associates are worried, and we are worried. And without relief from DC, we feel that owner and operators like ourselves will be forced to close indefinitely and lay off the associates that we have come to regard as family over the years. We are also worried about our communities. I think it's important to point out that in the state of California, 482 cities levied occupancy taxes generated through our hotels that generated $2.6 billion in municipal services. So not only is this an issue for us as an industry, for our associates, but also for the communities in the state of California that rely on tourism to continue to operate today. We urge DC to please, throw us another lifeline. I think as Chip mentioned, we feel that if we are able to get through the winter, that we are able to make it through to spring, that we will be able to turn a corner. But without any more further assistance from DC, we feel like it's going to be a very difficult winter for us here in California.
Thank you, Bijal, and thank you, Lynn. Next, we'll go across the country to the state of Florida, where the local government, the state government, has taken a much different approach in reopening businesses, and a state that is clearly dependent on tourism and hotel stays. But even with that different approach at the state level, the challenges are significant without any federal assistance. So I'll turn it over to my friend Carol Dover, who is the president and CEO of the Florida Restaurant and Lodging Association.
Oops, hold on, I'm unmuted. Sorry, there we go. Thank you. I said, thank you, Chip. And like my friends over on the West Coast, I have to say good afternoon. But also, like my colleagues on the West Coast, Florida has been devastated by the likes of COVID-19. Chip is correct. Our governor did open up our state on Friday to full capacity with some limitations. But regardless, we've missed our tourism season in so many parts of the state, of which Florida and our 850 miles of beaches rely heavily on the tourism industry. And also, like California, thank goodness we don't have the fires, but outside of that, everything else that was said is so true. And comparative to Florida, our beaches being closed, which Again, people come to Florida for the beautiful beaches that we have. But as of September, we are our second highest direct hotel job loss, only second to California with 76,746 job loss. Our hotel support job loss, again, was really surprising to me when I saw that it was second again only to California with over 172,000 jobs lost, more than New York, Texas, Nevada. So without congressional aid here, and not just here, all over the country, we have to get congressional help. It's the only thing that helped us survive and gave us a lifeline before, but we need this last, hopefully the last lifeline to get us over the hurdle that you've heard about so much here. And we really appreciate all of the media that are on today, because without you all getting the message out, we all talk among ourselves every week, sometimes every day, but we need people like you to help share the stories and how truly catastrophic it's been on all of our states. I say this quite often. The industry is on life support. And without this final piece to help us get off of life support, there will be thousands and thousands more jobs lost. So again, I thank you for hearing us today. I'm thrilled to introduce you to one of our lovely and great hoteliers, Lisa Lombardo. I think she has the best title of anybody. She is the Chief People and Culture Officer for the Hotel Development and Management Group in Central Florida. Lisa, thank you for agreeing to talk today.
Well, thanks for inviting me. And Bijal, first I want to say happy anniversary and congratulations to you and your family. That's a tremendous milestone.
Thank you.
So at HDG Hotels, we live by our mission to positively impact, and it starts with our people and the communities in which we have a presence. So we're banking on recovery and for action to be taken that will safeguard our people and the investments we have made throughout the state of Florida at a time when circumstances in so many ways have been beyond our control. And that's hard for a company with an entrepreneurial spirit to admit to itself. We're doing the best to remain optimistic that our country has a tradition of being resilient, but we're also very grounded in the reality that we have hotels with RevPAR down $42 year over year, and ADR drops in our state where tourism is supposed to rule and fund our coffers that could take us 3 to 5, if not more years to recoup. So we're grateful. We're so very grateful for what AHLA and so many of our associations like FRLA and AHOA have done to fight for and advocate for PPP and all that the CARES Act did to equip and afford us to be able to bring our team members back to work and to afford our team members the ability to make the appropriate decisions for their families. But we were early recipients of PPP funds, and we played by the original rules and deadlines. So we brought our people back, and they were champs. When we didn't have breakfast to serve because we didn't have guests and we didn't have laundry to do, they would pick up that pressure washer or a paintbrush because they just wanted to be back to work. So well done with the payroll protection plan, right? But now what? Those funds are gone as of the end of June, actually, and our FTE is on a decline. As small business owners, we are the fiduciaries of people's livelihoods, and bringing them back cannot have been temporary. And under normal circumstances, we know how to find a way forward for ourselves, but these are not normal circumstances. So we're left holding our breath, wondering what's in store for us. And we just want to be able to exhale with some relief, especially if that relief could be PPP forgiveness to small businesses. And we know we're not alone in this, and we just appreciate having the opportunity to be heard. Thanks, Chip.
Yeah. Thanks, Lisa, and thanks, Carol. Next, we'll go to Illinois, and while they don't have as many beaches as California and Florida, they do have some there on Lake Michigan. But it is a city that has been devastated by the fact there are no major meetings, conferences, and conventions. Summertime in Chicago is always marked by a city full of convention goers. And Michael Jacobson is here to talk about the impact that Illinois has felt from the coronavirus and the need that Illinois, like the other 49 states, has to make sure we get another round of PPP and some relief through the Main Street Lending Act. Michael?
Thank you, Chip, and thanks for everybody for being on the call. I think it's just an absolute critical topic that we're talking about today, because the sad reality is that summer is behind us, and that's particularly the case here in Illinois. Winter is coming, both literally and figuratively. We need Congress to act and act now. The hotel industry is one of the largest economic engines and tax generators for the state of Illinois. In fact, every Illinois household would pay over $1,600 more in taxes without the tax revenue that we generate for the state. So our communities simply can't afford for us to fail. The PPP was a good start, but we just need another lifeline, and we need it from Congress now. Our industry is dependent on several things. Business travel and conventions, which is obviously on hold indefinitely because of the overly burdensome restrictions that we currently have on meeting sizes here in Illinois. International travel, which is of course also at a standstill, and leisure travel, which has rebounded, but still is a sliver of what it was. Occupancy in Illinois, and especially in Chicago, is lagging behind other states and cities, even other urban markets. While national occupancy rates have recovered to about 50% nationwide, our numbers here in Chicago are still hovering around 20% each week. At the same time, while business is at an all-time low, our hoteliers are very proud of the considerable steps that we've taken to invest in things like PPE, so many P's, and other operational improvements to ensure the safety of our employees and guests. These new precautions are obviously very important, but naturally cost money. Above and beyond the property loans that are at risk, our hoteliers are also on the hook for incredibly high property tax payments. This was a problem before COVID and is even more so now. Some of our downtown Chicago hotels pay over $30,000 a day in property taxes. $30,000 a day, meaning they have to sell over 200 rooms just to break even each day, just on property taxes. Without further help, the consequences will not only be dire, but many of the losses will be permanent. Our total hotel-related jobs, which are direct hotel jobs and other jobs supported by hotels, because we have a ripple effect through the economy in other areas like food service companies, farmers that service our properties, those job losses as of September are already at 67,000 people. That's more than just colleagues. Many of these are team members that have been with our hotels for 10, 20, even 30 years. The potential job losses without congressional aid are going to nearly double to 131,000 of our colleagues and team members. Looking at hotel closures, half of our hotels are at risk of foreclosures without further help from Washington. That was evident here in Illinois recently with the foreclosure proceedings that began with the Palmer House, one of our largest and most historic hotels in Illinois. Other of our hotels have tried to reopen, but have already shut down again for the winter because of the restrictions that are in place and the lack of demand, further delaying our ability to hire people back. The last thing I'll mention is that there's a common misperception of the hotel industry. Most people think that the major brands that you're familiar with, like Marriott, Hilton, Hyatt, own each hotel. That is simply not the case. Hotels are individually owned, many of which are owned by small business owners based right here in Illinois. These are our neighbors and family members who are at risk of losing their entire livelihoods and are doing everything they can just to survive. Speaking of those local hoteliers, I wanted to introduce one of our members and an Illinois-based hotelier, Bob Habib, who is the founder and CEO of Maverick Hotels and Restaurants. Bob?
Thank you, Michael. Again, my name is Bob Habib, and I'm the CEO of Maverick Hotels and Restaurants in Chicago. We started to see a little bit of a light at the end of the tunnel in our hotels towards the end of the second quarter, when the CARES Act allowed us to bring back some of our team members. We started to see a little bit of life from that traditional summer travel season. Now that light at the end of the tunnel appears to be a train headed in our direction. Our PPP money is long gone. The summer travel season is exhausted, and we're being forced to go back and look again at laying off our team members, many of whom have been serving guests for decades. There's no question that a vaccine in 2021 is going to come far too late for many hotels and restaurants that are now piling up tons of debt and falling further and further behind with their creditors. The prospect of a widespread liquidity crisis in the hospitality sector is indeed not exaggerated. The face of hospitality might look very different in the United States a few months from now if we don't see some relief, and relief quickly, from Washington. Back to you, Chip.
Thank you, Bob, and thank you, Michael, for giving us the landscape of what's happening in Illinois. Before we go to questions, and I have a few which I'll read here in just a minute, I did want to mention that, sometimes we get asked the question, what exactly are we asking for? Well, let's start with PPP. PPP was workable. It did help. There's no question about it. I think you've heard that from the people that are on this Zoom call today. But the reality is that PPP was eligible for everyone. You could have been a business making hand sanitizer and still received PPP. You could have been making face masks and still received PPP. The second round of PPP, which hopefully will come soon, could simply tap into the additional resources that were left over from the last round of PPP. Keep in mind, there's already about $150 billion that has been appropriated by Congress. This is not new money. It's already been appropriated, that was unused because the restrictions on how much you could borrow in the first round of PPP were so limited that you really couldn't get access to much money. It was 2 times monthly payroll. And as you've heard here, most of that money ran out back in early summer or maybe even late spring. And so with that extra $150 billion that was already appropriated, it only seems reasonable to direct that to the businesses that have been hurt the most. Clearly, hotels would fall into that category, along with restaurants and anyone else in the tourism and travel world. And so if you just took the money from PPP that was already appropriated and made it eligible for businesses that have been hurt the most, whether it's 30%, 40% revenue decline, those businesses could possibly survive until next spring. The second measure of appropriated money that is frustrating beyond almost description is the fact that the Main Street Lending Act, which was touted by those who passed it as a panacea to much of the troubles that medium and large businesses would ultimately face, has not worked at all. If you recall, that almost $500 billion, actually a little over $500 billion, that was appropriated by Congress was supposed to be leveraged for multi-trillions of dollars of economic activity in our economy. And yet almost none of the money has been lent out yet. So that money is simply sitting there unused. And you can imagine how frustrating it is to these thousands of small business owners who have seen that Congress has appropriated the money and they can't gain access to it to save their businesses. That is the frustration we face. And perhaps the last and almost most difficult one to handle is that our elected officials in Congress, if you went to today and asked them what was the most important thing happening in their life today, many would probably, if they were honest, tell you that it's either a political debate that's happening later tonight or their own reelection campaign. And I'm not sure we can express our frustration enough that our elected officials, who are defined as public servants, care more about, or in many cases seem to care more about, going home to protect their own jobs than they care about the very jobs of the people they're supposed to represent. And those jobs, as you've heard today, are measured in the hundreds of thousands just in these 3 states alone. And so we're calling on Congress to please not leave Washington, D.C. until the job is done. We know your election means a lot to you. Frankly, to most Americans, it doesn't mean a whole lot. What matters to most Americans right now is the next ability to pay their mortgage, to keep their business afloat, to put food on their table. These are the things that really matter in life. So please stay in Washington, D.C., do your job, help these small business owners survive something that was no fault of their own. If you do that, we'll all be better off for it. And guess what? If you do the right thing, someone once famously said, you'll stand a better chance of getting reelected. So we're urging Congress to do that. Now, here are some of the questions that came in. From Grant Broadhurst asked, what is the length of time between now and the expected recovery, and how much federal money would be needed to keep the hotel industry alive until next spring or summer? Well, look, we're hoping that the spring and summer is a time of recovery. Clearly, if we can continue down the path of a vaccine being readily available in the first quarter of 2021, then we believe that confidence in travel, both leisure travel and business travel, will return. Now, there is some question about when large conventions will start booking again and when they will be held, and that may be next summer. But we believe that with the vaccine and therapies that we'll be past this by next spring. How much money would that require? Less than what is in the PPP right now. If all of that money went to just the travel and tourism industry, you could probably cover all the problems between now and next spring. But no one is certain how long this is going to last, and no one is certain exactly how much money is necessary. But we believe that is a good start towards solving this problem. I'll open up that question to any of my other colleagues that are on the phone here, whether it be California, Illinois, or Florida, about when do you see business returning and how much help is necessary.
I can start, Chip, and I think I saw another question came through that hopefully this helps answer as well. Here in Illinois, we are subject to very strict restrictions still, including a limit of no more than 50 people. And more than half of our total revenue for many of our hotels is reliant on meetings and events, or what we call group travel. So until those restrictions get eased, we're going to be in a world of pain. And conversations are ongoing with Governor Pritzker and his team, as well as here in the city of Chicago, with Chicago Department of Public Health. It has been frustrating, to say the least, especially as we see other states, and take politics aside, Republican and Democratic states have reopened quicker. And we have put so many significant steps in place that protect our employees, protect our guests, where we can safely and responsibly resume meetings. And yet these proposals have fallen on deaf ears. And I think we've showed that in other states that have allowed to reopen responsibly, including our next door neighbors, Indiana, who just resumed conventions again. So those conversations are ongoing. There's no sign of changing those anytime soon, which is frustrating to our hotel owners and operators. But until some of those restrictions get eased, there isn't going to be a significant recovery. Leisure travel can only help us so much. People doing staycations or the regional people driving to some of our markets can only go so far until really the heart of our business of group travel gets to resume. So the timing is a little bit unclear, but until that resumes, we're going to need help from the federal government in the forms of the programs you mentioned.
Thank you, Michael. There is a question, you partially answered that one, from Tony Cabrera at ABC7 Los Angeles. Tony, thanks for being on the call and asking the question. What's more important, reopening the sectors or receiving another round of PPP? I would say in the short term, it's clearly another round of PPP. Even in the best of times, late fall and winter is always difficult in our industry. But in the long term, we've got to have a reopened economy. We have to have people traveling again. So PPP is, as we mentioned, is a lifeline, hopefully to make it next spring. But we've got to take, as Michael just pointed out there are some good policies that have been employed around the country. And you've seen certain economies open up quicker and safely than others. And we ought to learn from this and forget Democrat or Republican, set that aside. Let's just look at best practices, what has worked and what has not worked in the different places around the country, and begin using those, because long-term, people need to travel again, and that's the only way that the industry survives. There was a question from Cameron from Skift, and he and I have been talking about this issue now for months, and it talks about the risk of loan defaults from hotels. We know on the CMBS side, which is commercial mortgage-backed securities, that the delinquency rate, which is the first step towards default, is already at about a quarter of the hotels across the country that use that type of financing. We can't imagine that the traditional lenders are much further behind that. They may be delayed, but the percentage ultimately will get there. And we'll see those numbers continue to rise. So if we look at the reality of today, and we say to ourselves that probably 25% of all hotels are already on that pathway towards foreclosure, then we can see just how significant this problem is, because as we started 2020, there were 56,000 hotels across the US. If we only had 25% fall into default, you're still looking at, about 17,000 hotels, if the math serves me correctly off the top of my head. But I'll turn it over to, I know Bijal Patel is there in Northern California. As Bijal, as you mentioned, your family's run hotels for a long time. What are you hearing from your colleagues in and around Northern California, particularly on the limited service side, about hoteliers who may not make it?
Right, and actually, we ourselves are going through bank negotiations right now on our debt. We use conventional loans, many local community banks here to lend and for our properties. And just a personal story, we were able to get a 3-month deferral right off the bat as soon as the pandemic started. And then back in June, we had to go back to our local community banks and get another 3 months of deferral. So we got 6 months of deferral. But a lot of the lenders in Northern California, small community banks, their hands are tied too now. And so we find ourselves at the table actually just in the last couple of weeks trying to figure out, okay, now what do we do? You know, we were able to defer our mortgage payments for 6 months, but you know, the small community banks need us to start making payments, but we're not really in a position right now. You know, at 41% occupancy, you know, we can't really make those payments. And so we're trying to think of things right now like interest only payments for the next 3 months to 3 to 6 months, or those kinds of things to try and at least prevent those notes from being put into foreclosure. So we will try to come up with some type of happy medium that allows us to still to not enter into default. But it is kind of a very scary time, and you know, we were fortunate to get those initial 6 months, but heading into the winter now here with no PPP and having our notes suddenly be due, it's definitely a scary time.
Thank you, Bijou. There's a question from Jenna Tesse. I hope I pronounced that properly, from Fox. What are your thoughts on the $2.2 trillion bill that was released yesterday? You know, this is, I know I've used the word and perhaps overused the word frustration here in the last few moments, but this is the frustrating part, is that the Democrat version of PPP is something we fully support. The Republican version of PPP is something we fully support. And in fact, there doesn't seem to be much disagreement between the two parties on the need for PPP and what it might look like. That is the challenge that we face, is that both parties seem to agree on the PPP part of this. But what they don't agree on is holding up the rest of the process, and whether that be liability protection, which we think is critically important, state and local funding, which I know has been a significant part of Speaker Pelosi's package for quite some time. And you heard Michael a moment ago talk about property taxes that are astronomical that probably can't be paid. Well, that's money that goes directly to state and local governments, and we recognize that their income stream is being reduced significantly, just like the local hoteliers and local businesses in their communities. So we understand the arguments on both sides that are holding this up. But if Congress can't agree on those items, then we would ask them to simply agree on the things they can agree on. And there seems to be widespread agreement on the refunding of the PPP, having it directed towards those businesses that have been hurt the most. We fully support that. And as I said, it seems like Republicans and Democrats alike both support that as well. Now, with respect to the Main Street Lending Act, which has been a failure to this point, that just simply needs the administration to rewrite the rules. They created the rules to begin with. And if they would simply rewrite those rules to make sure that any real estate-backed or asset-backed business who was written out of the first round of Main Street lending was eligible to receive those loans in the same manner that they would from a traditional lender, that would go a long way towards helping a lot of business. Again, if you want questions, go to the Q&A box and please enter them. We got one from Grant talking about the expected job losses and how was that calculated, and is the expectation that none of these losses would occur if aid was given. So the job losses were calculated from our survey of about 1,000 members with margin of error of I believe less than 3%, about 1,000 members in our industry, as to what would happen if they were not able to receive any additional aid, and the percentage that said they would have to continue to lay off workers. And then of course, sadly, about 2/3 said they couldn't make it another 6 months and they would actually go out of business. And so it did contemplate that without aid, that what the survey results said would actually take place. Now, would there be a situation where there was no aid and some of those losses didn't occur? Possibly. But I don't think in any way it lessens the impact of what we're discussing here today, that hundreds of thousands of jobs are at risk if there's no further congressional aid. Any more questions? Well, we don't have any more questions. I want to thank everybody for participating in this. As you can hear from leaders in our industry in California, in Florida, and Illinois, from hoteliers that are on the ground level in each of those states that are trying to stay afloat. This is urgent and this is necessary. We're not asking for a handout. We're simply asking for some help to make it past this really tough stretch on in the next spring and next summer. And so we thank you for participating in this today. We thank you for any coverage that you can give us, because we're trying to get this message out to elected officials. Please don't go home until you finish the job. Thanks again for participating today, and I know all of us are ready to answer any further questions after this event. You can reach out to us individually. Thanks so much.